Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concerns of the unknown. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I'm the working group manager here at ATARC, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome you all at home, our attendees, for joining us, and a special thanks to Aaron Scanlon, Josh Broadbent, and the rest of the Beyond Trust team. This afternoon, the plan is to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session where we will pop in a few polls and answer your questions as we go. Before we begin, I just want to encourage you to please submit those questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform, and also answer the poll questions throughout in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credits for attending today's event. Now on to our panelists' introductions. If you all could please come on camera and go ahead and unmute yourself. I would love for each of you to share with our audience who you are, what agency you are with, what role you play there, and anything else that you'd like to share at the start of today's event. Let's start with Derek first, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Curtis. I work in the Department of Veterans Affairs in the software product management section. One of my roles is director of software testing in 508, but a more recent role now is senior technical advisor, to where I spend a lot of time looking at product integration and technology.
Thanks, Derek. Great to have you here on the panel. And we will jump next to Crystal.
Hi there, I'm Crystal Philcox. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Enterprise Strategy Management at the Federal Acquisition Service and GSA. And we are doing a lot of development on new experiences for federal buyers and federal suppliers. And so we are doing a bit of digital transformation there, and hope to be able to share some of those best practices and some of our experience.
Thanks, Crystal. Let's jump next to Ms. Raven Manuel.
Hello, Kirsten. Thank you for having me on this wonderful panel with these wonderful panelists. I am the Senior Application Developer and DevOps Engineer for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I wear lots of hats, but the main ones that I enjoy the most are creating, kind of designing and implementing the smaller interactives that visitors engage with in the museum. And I also love trying to figure out puzzles, that is DevOps. And so I create strategy, recommend tools, process to leadership. And I do a lot of R&D trying to find technologies that we can use to enhance the visitor's experience, and that makes our exhibitions more accessible.
Thank you, Raven. And we will hear from our industry professional next, Josh.
Thank you. I'm Josh Broadbent. I am the RVP of Solutions Engineering with Beyond Trust Software. I have, at this point, over 20 years experience in IT and specifically in identity and access management. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Great introductions. So the first question that I want to pose to each of our panelists is, what does Devsecops mean to you? Anything that you would like to share about Devsecops and your experience and your take on it? And please include in your answer why you believe it is important to agency digital transformation. So feel free to elaborate on this question as much as you would like. We'll just go in the same order. Derek, would you like to kick us off?
I would. So digital DevSecOps and digital transformation really has fundamentally changed the way we do business. We've shifted from a project-centric platform into more of a product focused to where we are really engaged with our customers, understanding our needs, and then building a cohesive team around that product that takes care of it throughout its life cycle, and locking in and understanding what the customer really wants out of that product. And so now our teams own the product for an entire life cycle, not just building it and throwing it over the fence, but taking care of their product throughout its life cycle. DevSecOps has also allowed us to be more focused on our customers and really engage with our customers throughout the process and making sure we're meeting that need. But also in IT modernization in the digital space, it's changed the way we look at refreshing our equipment and look at how we refresh our infrastructure in a more agile methodology.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate you sharing that with us. So Crystal, over to you next. What has your experience been with DevSecOps?
Yeah, the way that I look at this is that digital transformation only happens when you're able to iterate on what users need most, right? And I remember, way back in the day when we used to, do a very waterfall process and sit around and say, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could just get somebody to present us some code, and then we could tell them, no, fix this here, fix that there, and then they could just go fix it, right? Like, and we couldn't do it, right? Because of the way that we wrote the contracts and the methodologies that we were following. And so this new focus, as Derek said, on product really fixes some of that. It starts to help us use methodologies like human-centered design and agile development. A lot of that is outlined in OMB A11, section 280. It's in the CX EO that just came out. And it takes using a DevSecOps approach to development to ensure that you can more quickly build in security and testing as you go. You reduce your risk of errors as you go. And these things like human-centered design, CX, right, DevSecOps, they're separate, but they should be done together and they complement each other. And so if you're doing DevSecOps and you're focusing on sort of a continuous build, and if you're not shipping usable code as you go, then it's not worth doing DevSecOps, right? So I really promote that you should really, as you're moving into this methodology, get a little bit more comfortable with shipping regularly, and get the business folks and your partners on the business side to be more comfortable with, hey, let's just get out some usable functionality first. Let's do that now, and have a little bit more as you go and continue to build on the product. So I would also just recommend that it's extremely important to write your contracts to accommodate the way that your DevSecOps team is working, or the way that you expect your contractor to work. And what that really means is it means focusing on a North Star that you're trying to reach, and then developing your milestones around delivering use cases for real users, not around delivering documents. And so that will allow you to deliver functionality as you go and create a much better product in the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal. And then Raven, you always have unique perspectives on things, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say next.
Awesomeness. I pretty much could ditto what Derek and Crystal said, but for DevSecOps, for myself, I actually think about the word itself, right? Why do we even have a term called DevSecOps? And I think, and I was very bristled by it when it first came out, but I do recognize that the point is to highlight and draw attention to security within the whole development and deployment lifecycle. And yeah, most people probably actually were doing that, but I know as a developer, I would do my little bit of security, and then, as Derek said, throw it over the wall to somebody who knew better than I did, right? Because I really wasn't interested in learning more about security than my little Idaho. So I think that what DevSecOps is doing, it's reaching out to developers like myself, and then up the chain to make sure that every place in that cycle, testing everything, has a layer of security, at least some type of security check. I also do agree with what Crystal and Derek have said about how it has enhanced and how it works hand in hand with digital transformation. For me, the other piece of it is it kind of acts as a protective shell over the implementation, right? If you have already considered security while you're transitioning from maybe some legacy state to some future state, you need to be consistently aware of the security, the attack vector, right? You need to be always looking at for bad actors. So you have to be vigilant to make sure that as you are going through this transformation, that every bit of it is covered so you don't leave yourself open to attacks while you're trying to get to that safe place. The end.
Thank you, Raven. And Josh, from your industry perspective, what else can you share with us on this topic?
Right. So I think that as we look at that concept of DevSecOps, a lot of this from an industry perspective has to do with automating that security part, right? So as you look at DevOps in that agile software lifecycle, we looked at several years ago, we would talk about the secure lifecycle development of software and what that looked like. And we talked about that in relation to things like NIST and CMMC and some other things. And now as we look at these types of agile sprints, as we're developing things, the idea that we're building security as an automated practice into the software so that it happens faster is the important part of DevSecOps that really is changing the way that we are handling applications and security in the space today.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that. Is there anything else that hasn't been said our panelists would like to weigh in on before I move on to our next question? If not, that is okay. So the next question that I wanted to get into before we move on to a poll is speaking to what advantages could be gained from implementing DevSecOps practices. So things that you've seen within your own agency happen or other maybe use cases. Anything that you would like to share with our audience around that? And we don't necessarily have to go in order, but if you are ready to share with us, come on off mute and go at it.
I can speak to this from as you said, from a unique perspective. In addition to what it's supposed to do as far as focus on the security level, I've seen two changes, at least from where I sit. One is for, of course, the process and the policies that we've adopted, because as I stated earlier, it has drawn attention and focus, not just from the practitioner and the technologists that know that that's supposed to happen, but also from leadership, right? We've got these executive orders and now all of this focus, these buzzwords, and now leadership is like, oh, this is important. I guess I should know it. And I'm going to assign some person to make sure that we're in compliance, right? So now we've got this, where we were having a bottom up, we now have a top down kind of like governance of security. The other thing, which is kind of like a side product, and I'm just not quite sure how this happened, is accessibility has come into play for us. I mean, yeah, there was an executive order for that, and we at the Smithsonian, we're very focused on accessibility, but just like form and function have like this kind of dichotomy, so does accessibility and usability and engagement, right? So we have to figure out how we are going to engage the broadest visitors and make it educational and still make it delightful. And when you have to think about whether or not contrast colors and whether the screen is low enough, just all of these areas that make an exhibit or an interactive accessible, it has brought focus, because we're thinking about security. We're like, well, what else are we missing, right? What else can we improve? And accessibility was actually one of those things that came out of it, which I'm very happy that it did. But I was like, wow, that's pretty cool that it did.
Well said, Raven. Would any of our other panelists like to weigh in on that, whether it was playing off of what Raven said, or Crystal, go ahead.
Well, I just, it makes me think of the US web design standards because they have great accessibility templates and, colors, recommendations, the whole thing in there. So I would just give that a little plug. So as you go though, you mentioned advantages of DevSecOps, and I mean, there's so many efficiencies you can gain from working this way. And not the least of, right, you'll hear a lot less, oh, that's not what I wanted, right? And so thinking about how to implement this, for your dev shop, it might not be a lot easier or a lot faster during the process, but in the end, the deliverable that comes out the end is going to have a lot fewer errors. You're going to reduce your risks in deployment, and you're going to get a lot closer to what the customer wants and what users will actually use and adopt. So I think that is some of the biggest advantages of DevSecOps and this new way of working.
Thanks, Crystal. We had one audience member ask if someone could share the accessibility template link as mentioned. So if that's possible, if you could put that in the chat. Thank you. Derek, go ahead.
First, Raven, thank you for your work in accessibility. I'm part of one of my jobs is 508 compliance within the VA, and so we do a lot of work in that space and communicating with those folks, both the veterans and our employees. So I appreciate the effort in that. Also, with implementing DevSecOps processes here at the VA, the two main key points, I think, are really the accountability piece of it, where the team now has ownership of the entire product. And there's a sense of ownership and teamwork around that. And the collaboration that inherently comes with that, not only with the team, but pulling in the business and the customers as teammates and part of the team. And we really embraced and experienced this during COVID, because when those requirements came to the agency that we had to quickly respond to, DevSecOps put us in a posture to where we could move agilely and quickly to deliver capabilities in weeks and then sometimes days, and making sure we kept pace with the business needs and also mandates for sharing information with the CDC and also sharing information with the news outlets writ large across the United States. And so we could not have done that being in the old mode we were in. So we really grew in DevSecOps, driven by need, but we were able to respond very quickly.
Thank you, Derek. Over to Josh.
Yeah, so, I think kind of adding on to what Raven and Crystal and Derek have said, as we've seen this transition to DevOps, with the addition of DevSecOps, obviously, I think one of the things that makes accessibility kind of become a topic is that since we're developing in sprints and we're using these sprint teams that usually include a UX specialist of some kind, it becomes easier to deliver these things. And because the deliverable and the person who is responsible for the deliverable is so much closer to the end user, the feedback comes back almost instantaneously. So that feedback loop that happens and the sprint life cycle that you get with these devs, especially as you automate things like security into the process, they become things you can focus on rather than having to focus on, well, did I, manage my secrets correctly when I was doing this particular type of development, or did I hard code in some sort of authentication for this, or things like that. So as you practice those DevSecOps type best practices, then you get to free up more resources to focus on things like accessibility.
Thanks, Josh. Any other comments from the panelists before I call for poll question number 1?
Crystal, thanks for shouting out the USD-WTS template. I actually am working with that team to help me use it for my interactives, because we do have a design template at the museum, but I feel that for accessibility, that team actually did a really wonderful job.
Great.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Derek. I'm sorry.
No, the one thing that I would say, just add on here is that, it's difficult to see how our budgeting practices sync up with this type of new development methodology, right? So we've usually, in government, we usually have funding buckets of development or operations and maintenance, right? And when we're moving into this space where we're really in continuous development, then these get a little fuzzy, right? And so I would just say to Gov folks who might be listening, make sure that as you're thinking about your budget for yourself, no matter what buckets it's in, right? You can think about infrastructure and you can think about continuous development, but do not think about the fact that once you've developed, it's over.
Excellent. Thank you for those insights. Let's pop up poll question number 1, please. There we go. What are you most interested in learning about today? So please take a moment to respond to this. If you're at home, options include how to reduce my attack surface by centralizing secrets management, why hybrid workforce challenge traditional access management, best practices in building a DevSecOps strategy, agency perspective on protecting DevOps environments, or all of the above. And we will just wait a few seconds here to see what our audience responds with, and then maybe we'll go ahead and share our take on whatever the response is. All of the above. Okay, never mind. We don't have time for that. Just kidding. Would any of our panelists like to speak to this poll though? How would you have answered, you feel like is the most prominent question in most people's minds when it comes to DevSecOps practices?
I would have chosen best practices because as an implementer, I need help in understanding what I don't know. Right? I only know what I know. And the bigger agencies actually, and especially the agencies that are more security focused, they have all sorts of little tips and tricks, right? And so can we use those from a larger agency and tweak them so that they actually work for agencies? Maybe we don't need to be that, I can't say we don't need to be that secure aware. We just need security awareness in other areas versus that. And maybe those are complements. That's the one I would have chosen.
Yeah, and that actually springboards into my next question anyways that I was going to pose to the panelists, which is why are DevOps environments important to secure and what are some of the best practices for doing so? So if any of our panelists could kind of speak to those best practices that you've experienced around security, anyone who is wanting to go for it. Go ahead, Josh.
So I'll start out here. I think as we have this conversation around security and DevOps, we have to look at the prominent breaches over the past 24 months, over the past 36 months. And you can see how easy it is for a company or an organization who doesn't apply appropriate DevSecOps type platforms to kind of paint themselves into a corner where they don't realize they're exposing themselves to a lot of additional threat vectors. One of the challenges to moving quickly in anything is that there's a tendency to reduce your focus on security when you move quickly. It doesn't matter what you do, whether it's in life or in IT or in app development. The quicker you move, the less careful you are. That's the way that we work. So by taking a step back and focusing on how we manage secrets, how we manage data at rest and in motion, and how we're encrypting that, and making sure that we have as much kind of RPA automation in that as possible, then as we take a look at that software development lifecycle, we can focus on the end product. We can focus on accessibility. We can focus on all these other things. But at the heart of it, if we are not actually focused on the security portion first and building it in this secure process and building it into a secure strategy, then the rest of it's not going to matter because we're ultimately delivering a product that's followable.
Go ahead, Derek.
Just to build on what Josh has said, it really is about thinking differently, a different mindset. right? In the VA, our primary top priority is protect veterans' data and customers' data. And as a veteran myself, I really, really appreciate those levels of protection. But when you start thinking about the sec in DevSecOps as part of a team, really start thinking about how I am going to build in my security throughout the entire process instead of just running, because DevSecOps is not just about running fast, it's about doing things differently and collaboratively, but making sure you're thinking about data and how you're going to protect that data and how you're going to protect that information, and really focus on from the beginning to the end, and not just talk about baking it in, but actually bake it in and build it in. But to me, it's all about the thought process behind that and how you employ that. We're doing a lot with the president's executive order when it comes to zero trust and the cyber platform that's out, and working through that as many agencies are. And within that, there are several security measures that you have to employ to protect your information. But DevSecOps teaming forces you to think about the how, the when, and what of that implementation to make sure you carry it throughout the process.
Thank you, Derek. Crystal, coming from a business customer perspective, does what Derek just said resonate with you? Do you have any additional comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as we start thinking about it, and I'll give you a story, right? Like we were about to release and somebody came in and said, oh, wait, no, we're going to be delayed another week or two. We got to do pen testing. And I'm like, wait a minute. I thought we were doing Devsecops here. How is this happening? Why are we delayed? And so, thinking through how how important that collaboration is inside these dev shops. It's really, really key. And like Josh said, data is the key, right? Data's how we're going to power all of these great experiences. And so thinking about how who gets access to that data, how they can use it, how much flexibility we give business owners in helping with continuous development on those applications, right? So designing in a way that there's containerized cloud solutions and microservices and ways that business folks can and product owners can have as much flexibility in updating that product as possible. And then you've got, right, then you can give sort of privileged access to business folks potentially that are for the more repetitive tasks, right? But the data you want to be very careful about and make sure that you've got access to those more for the right people with the right skills in your IT shops that have that have more complex that need to do the more complex data work. So that's how I would describe that.
Great, thank you, Crystal. And Raven, I see you went ahead and answered an audience question, so that was great. Thomas Hall was just asking about best practices for DevSecOps. So Raven, would you like to share what it is that you directed him towards?
Sure, I directed him to the other panelists. That was the first thing I did because I don't have a guide. But what I suggested and what I do is I like to talk to people, the practitioners, the technologists, the people who have implemented because they have hurt themselves trying to do something and it didn't work. And I need to know that before I try it. So if you're reading a guide that has been sterilized and it makes everything sound like roses and Oz, it's probably not going to be. And your situation is probably going to be unique. So you're going to need to ask like questions that are very much tailored to yourself. And you're not going to get that from a guide either because it just gives you an overview. Mm-hmm. Now, the other panelists, if you can answer us questions about like other resources, that would be great.
I was going to say, I'm like, I probably should have read the response before I posed the question. Would any of the other panelists like to answer that though, or share any insights there? And if you're wondering what question I'm referring to, it's under the answered section now. Derek, go ahead.
There's a lot out there about ways to do DevSecOps. It seems everyone has an opinion, but I would agree with Raven. It's not as simple on the surface as it seems. And it's very unique to your organization and your situation. And to Crystal's point, your skill sets within your IT and security departments. And so I would say use it as a framework and a model and kind of grow through it, but don't suffer in silence. Sort of raise your hand and say, hey, we have this situation. How did you handle it? Or how do you do this? And you'll find that almost every scenario has been covered by someone at least once, whether it's a pass or fail, but there's always learning. And we're still learning as an organization, quite frankly, as well. But you start the journey and you kind of get there, but it's not as simple as it seems on the surface.
Thank you, Derek. Go ahead, Crystal.
No, I would just say we've had, in my experience, we've had some good successes with things like Tiger teams, which would be a combination of our dev and our security folks, and sitting down ahead of time before the product development starts and really planning out how they're going to work together. And that seems to have solved some of the let me throw it over the fence to security in the end, and then it comes back with a no, right? And so I would say that's one thing that we've used. We also have a lot of especially for between our dev and our business product owners. We have release planning, 3-day release planning sessions, at least quarterly, where they run through all of the use cases that everyone is planning for the next couple of months, and that seems to keep everybody synced up and on the same page too. So
great, thank you, Crystal. Any other comments from the panelists there before we move on to our next audience question? All right, well, Nick Graham, he already kind of jumped ahead. So one of our questions that we had on the docket, I was going to ask Josh, how do DevOps and Zero Trust correlate? You're our Zero Trust guy. But that said, Nick asks, hello, panelists. Thank you for taking the time to present. How do the panelists see Zero Trust being applied to Devsecops, and what challenges, if any, does Zero Trust present to Devsecops? So Josh, you have the floor, sir.
So yeah, it's an interesting correlation between these two things, but ultimately I think they're going to have a better together story, especially as we continue to implement these security practices into our DevOps play. When you start to look at the concepts of zero trust, that concept of never trust, always verify. As you look through your DevOps cycle and you begin to establish security practices of how we are going to move these applications or these containers or whatever it is through the life cycle, the concept of microsegmentation and keeping, dev work separate, and the concept of having identities managed and understanding that even the identities that exist in a cloud are still identities. Even identities that exist to manage applications that are non-human identities are still identities that have to get verified, and that all has to get built into the process of DevSecOps. There will be hiccups as we figure that out. There will certainly be, those moments of understanding where you figure out the best path forward. But overall, I think these two things are going to play well together. As we took a look at the initial EO from Biden last May that talked about wanting to secure critical software infrastructure and critical software. When you start taking a look at that, agile development of software and DevSecOps being built into that, all of a sudden the security posture of software entirely changes. The way that we respond to threats inside software and applications entirely change. And when that happens, then the way that we treat those applications from a zero trust perspective changes because they're getting updated and there's sprints happening much more often. So overall, I mean, I think these two particular concepts are definitely converging for DevOps, certainly. And I think we'll see them in a better together story very soon.
I have a question, Josh. Sorry, Kirsten.
Go for it.
I didn't know whether to put it. I didn't know whether to put it in the Q&A or just to come out with it, because I'm always fascinated. It actually irritates me, the marketing around these terms, right? So zero trust to me has always existed because I can remember way back. I worked in a Microsoft place, and for Microsoft, but we had a lot of Microsoft products, and it was always the least amount of access is supposed to be given to any user. There was always supposed to be roles. You never gave rights to a person, you gave rights to roles, and then you move people in and out. You should never have all of these things. And even now for for the yearly annual computer security thing, where it's totally beaten in that the people are the worst things about security, right? That's your security flaw. So this idea of zero trust that we have right now, how is it different than what actually was happening already?
I promise I did not pay her to ask that question. I really didn't. That is a great question. So Raven, it's important that this is kind of one of those explanations that is nuanced, but the concept that you're talking about is that concept of least privilege, right? We want to give somebody the least amount of privilege that it's possible for them to get their job done. Zero trust applies the principle of least privilege, but it extends it. So the principle of least privilege and the concept that, hey, I'm going to make sure that this person has the least amount of privileges to do their job and accomplish their mission effectively has been around for a long time. You know, as a former IT admin, we've been taking away users' admin rights for as long as I can remember, because I don't want you to change your desktop to a picture of a squirrel because you don't know what's behind that picture. Like, this is just one of those things I don't want you to do. So we've been doing that as long as I can remember. But the difference between least privilege and zero trust is that with zero trust, we're building in constant reauthentication checks. So in addition to that particular user having the least amount of privileges, every time that user goes to access a resource, we're making sure that a particular asset or application or something else is reauthenticating, that we know where that user is, that we know who that user is, and that they're still authenticating from the same device, and maybe somebody didn't try to do a pass the hash here or like a man in the middle attack. So the idea is we're taking that concept of least privilege and we're taking it a step further. We're saying not only do we want you to have the least amount of privileges possible, but we're also never going to trust that you were supposed to be here, even if I saw you walk through the door before me. Like, I still don't trust that you're supposed to be here. So what we see with this concept of zero trust versus least privilege were usually a specific set of vendors. If you were doing Active Directory, you had Active Directory management with roles. There are a lot of other things. What we see with zero trust is an industry collaboration, right? I've done a ton of these panels, and all these panelists will tell you there's no silver bullet for zero trust. There's a bunch of vendors that are coming together, and we're saying, hey, look, here's my niche, and I am going to take care of mine really well, but I'm going to collaborate with these vendors over here really well, so that we are actually getting a zero trust picture. So that technical alliances part of zero trust is happening on a scale that I haven't seen happen in the security industry before. Guys like Cisco, SonicWall, the traditional firewall people never really cared whether or not they really played well with a lot of other things. They would kind of integrate with some endpoint stuff, but it was an afterthought. It wasn't a collaborative mindset of I am advancing a security posture for an organization. So that's really where that changes. Sorry, I kind of hijacked that conversation for a second.
Thank you so much. I will now take heed because I was just ignoring it. Thank you.
Do any of the other panelists have comments before I move on to our next audience question?
I would just add on to I echo everything Josh has said, but also add on to it's the data, right? And we want to know everything about the data, and we want to know it all the time. And so zero trust also brings in a level of monitoring to where things are supposed to be happening the way they're supposed to happen at every minute of every hour of every day. And then if it doesn't, you get my attention. And you can only do that through monitoring and not trusting the individuals you allow to touch the data in the first place. So I would echo Josh 100%.
Yeah, I would just add, right, it's secure data powers great experiences in software, right? So that's really what we're looking for, certainly on the business side. The better and the more secure your data, the better your user experience. So, and digital transformation has a very strong focus on data. And what we've been able to do in my organization is really create a data layer. We are going to have to backpedal a little bit because we did it before the EO came out. So I'm a little bummed about that, but and do some, right, like Josh said, encrypting data at rest and figuring out how to encrypt in motion across the network, which really helps, right? It helps you and micro segmentation, right? So that if you do get a breach, that no one has access to all the gold, right? And so what we've been able to do is really create a data layer where all the authoritative data sources live. And we've got services in between that layer and our application layer. So we are pulling from that data layer into our application layer to provide users real-time information and give them great self-service experiences. And we are also pulling from that data layer to create a whole data analytics environment that with a data catalog and some data visualization tools, so that all of our data analysts and a whole computational service. So our data analysts can do great AI. They can answer interesting business questions and produce evidence as required by the Evidence Act. So we are really trying to build out that data layer so that we have data stored once and used many times. And so that has really, I think, now that zero trust is, coming into this picture, really that's going to make this data layer even more powerful because we're going to have all of that security built in at a very detailed data level.
Thank you all for sharing your responses to these questions. And another audience question before we put up the second poll. Thomas Hall says, thank you, Raven. Say that you have an organization that is new to Agile and they have new teams spinning up. Are there any first steps to follow in order to get the team on the right path to incorporate Devsecops? Also, are there any user groups that you would recommend? Raven, I saw that you would like to answer that, so we'll start with you.
Awesome. That's a great question, Thomas. The first thing you want to do before you spin up new teams is to first consider what you are looking for out of Agile. What is your purpose of actually transitioning to Agile, which is actually a good thing to do since DevOps and Devsecops actually kind of leverage that the methodology. But you need to know why you're doing it so that you can understand what part of it that you need to implement for your organization, because Agile is just a methodology, it's a philosophy, and there are things that make things agile versus making things go fast down a pipeline, right? There are real things that you need to do there. Once you've understood what your business problem is so that you know what your business solution could be, then you need to come up with at least some type of outline, or it's a paper, this is a paper thing. Come up with something, some strategy that you want to have done consistently. And I'm telling you this because I didn't do this, okay? And so I'm paying the price for this. I was all in it and like, yeah, let's do this. And I really didn't understand the tools versus the process versus the people versus the culture change. And I just focused on one thing. And I thought it will all come together. We'll all do kumbaya and everything will be perfect at the end. And like Crystal said, they had to backpedal. I had to just run back because I had done things that were not quite what we needed. And I bit off more than we actually needed to chew. So you have to actually understand why you're going this route, what your business problem is, how you want to solve it, and how do you want your teams to work with it. And I'm saying that because we have a lot of contracted development teams. And so we allow them the flexibility to bring some of their tools to the table to make our digital products, but they can't go off the wall and do all of this really bizarre things that we won't be able to, one, support, maintain, sustain, or upgrade later on in the line. So you really kind of need to have some type of structure when you're doing that. I want to ask if the other panelists, if you want to actually chime in on this, but I actually don't know any good user groups. So I would be interested in that answer myself.
Would any of our other panelists like to respond to that?
I don't know of any formalized user groups, but I would echo the why of it, right? Really understanding why it is you're following a methodology. And the biggest thing is to understand Agile is an approach and a methodology. It is not a silver bullet, right? And it is not an end all be all to solve every problem. So you really need to understand what problem you're trying to solve, as Raven said, but then the team members need to understand why they are embarking on the approach they're embarking on, because you have to really, I keep saying collaborate and think, but it's really true. You really need to think about what it is you're doing, and there's scaled Agile, right? If I don't need all the pieces, I'll just pick these components that'll help me get to where I'm going. And then if I need to, through lessons learned, because you always look back, what did I learn throughout this process? What worked? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? Why did it work? Because sometimes when something works, we don't look back at it. You don't question success, but there are things to learn even when you are successful. And so again, I don't know of any community groups, but rather more of the philosophy of Agile as a whole.
Thank you, Derek. Josh, go ahead.
So I'll just stop and make a shameless plug for ATARC's app dev groups and DevOps groups. If you are not a member of those and actively attending those, you absolutely should be.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, we have quite a few working groups under our 5 different mission areas, and our security mission area and our DevOps mission area would certainly apply to this panel discussion. So you can always reach out to me to get more involved in those. And Raven leads one herself under application development and development operations. So
I'll just add that at GSA, we have a group called digital.gov, and I'll post the link to the communities of practice here. There is a DevOps community of practice in there.
Great, excellent. All right, so I want our panelists please turn their attention to the next audience questions. So if you have an answer prepared you'd like to share with us, we'll get to that momentarily. But let's pop up our poll question number 2 in the meantime. Where is your agency in the process of securing your DevOps environment? Options for this include mature security process and solution. You have a solution, but you're maturing the process. You're evaluating technologies, or you're doing nothing. Please take a moment to answer that poll. And then I just want to remind the audience, we have only about 10 minutes left of this discussion. So please send your questions in before we run out of time. That being said, we have an audience question asking for our panelists' thoughts on open source security and governance for application and container portfolios such as Log4j. We got our poll response up. So if any of our panelists would like to answer Otis Barnes' question on security and governance, the floor is all yours.
So I guess I'll start out. And I feel like I've been dominating the security discussion, and I apologize to my fellow panelists. Open source security is something that in the federal space and DoD space, we've had conversations around for a long time. How do we make sure that we keep these particular forks up to date? How do we make sure that We're scanning for vulnerabilities. And I think this comes back to, and this isn't even necessarily in my space specifically, but this comes back to how we build out our Devsecops practices with vulnerability scanning. As Crystal alluded to earlier, when you get to the end and you're doing your pen testing at the end and taking a break, we've missed a step somewhere in here. If we're just now coming back to pen testing after we're done with the testing cycle. There's plenty of great vendors out there that can handle application testing and pen testing and vulnerability assessments for open source code that you're using inside your stack. So you absolutely have to build that into your life cycle. You have to build that into your ops cycle, or it's going to bite you when it ultimately comes back. So, and then the other half of that is, the typical SDLC stuff, document. So you need to know when you're using those open source containers so that when they announce a log4j thing, you're like, oh crap, I've got that and I need to go check that. So, I mean, those are all things that are prototypical, but at the same time, so instrumental in making sure that the DevSecOps chain runs smoothly and that we're not coming off the rails.
Thank you, Jen. Go ahead,
sorry.
Renee. No,
I wanted to also just add just a little bit onto that is the fact that I am a member of the Linux Foundation. So I go to a bunch of those particular meetings, which are quite entertaining. But on the serious side, they, no matter what the open source technology is, if it's something that has a large community, security is actually going to be at the top of the discussion. It's going to be in the micro discussions on any part of that application, whatever the application is because in the open source community, open source is the thing and we want everybody to adopt it. And it would not be adoptable if there were a bunch of security holes. So from the other side, you can, although there are security issues, and that's because we have bad actors and nothing is truly secure, the people who actually make open source and maintain the code are looking at it always and looking at ways. And there are a lot of smart people that are doing that. And they interact with the government. They are in the government. They work security. So it's not like they are coming up with stuff on their own.
Thank you, Raven. Any other comments here before I pop up, ask for poll question number 3?
No, I would just ditto what Raven just said, right? Open source, you've got a lot more eyes on it. A lot more eyes on it all the time. You've got people working with it all the time. So you shouldn't be scared of it.
Great, thank you all. So again, panelists, I want to direct your attention over to the next question that came through, Shane Jacob. Read through that, and if you'd like to respond, we'll get to that in just a moment. But let's pop up poll question number 3, our last poll question for today. I'm interested in discussing the following with a cyber expert: how to reduce attack surface, how privileged access management secures DevOps environments, how zero trust DevSecOps and PAM correlate, all the above or none of the above. Audience, please go ahead and respond to that poll. And this may be actually the last question we have on the docket before we run out of time. So Shane Jacobs would like to know, zero trust network access, also known as software defined perimeter, is the most common implementation of the zero trust model. So what happens if the zero trust network access provider is compromised? Are companies and sensitive assets still secure? Okay, we've got our response from poll number 3. And then if any of the panelists would like to weigh in on this last audience question or share any of their experience with this. Go ahead, Derek.
I know Josh wants a piece of this, and so I'll just take a small part of it. In my experiences, more rooted in the DoD space. I kind of grew up over there, and so those attack vectors and vendor compromises were too often in some cases, but it always starts with the vendor being transparent, right? Because we need to know that something actually happened before we can take any actions, and then come up with appropriate remediation actions to make sure we isolate that node and figure out what happened to the data, whether somebody walked in and grabbed a hard drive or did they access it remotely. And there are levels of actions you take based on the circumstance. But it always, always, always starts with being informed and knowing something happened as soon as it happened. And I'll defer to Josh for the rest.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna pass an opportunity to take a swing at this, but ultimately, the entire concept of zero trust is that it's not one vendor. And the reason that it's not one vendor is because you're not totally susceptible to the failure of one vendor. So while we are implementing a lot of ZTNA, we're doing a lot of SASE stuff, which I hate as an acronym. I'm gonna say that every time I have to say that acronym. That secure access service edge. All of these things that we're doing, there are other zero trust concepts at play. So other things are still providing authentication and access, and they're still trying to define location of where things are coming from. So, ultimately, this is about having a good stack at play that integrates well, because you need to know, there's so much more information than you need to know other than, hey, look, I've defined this ZTNA, so now I'm covered. Zero trust is not one product. It is a mindset or a strategy of defense that we take and implement several products that correlate together. And by doing so, we aren't putting our entire keys or vault or access at risk when one of them gets compromised, if we have implemented the rest of it effectively. That's the entire point.
Thank you, Josh. And we have only 5 minutes left here, and I want to give each of you an opportunity to share with us your parting words with our audience. So anything that you would like to share to close us out, you can direct people to some sort of resource, share your favorite book, favorite quote, or just any last words of wisdom. Raven, let's start with you.
This has been a very educational panel for me, so thank you all. I've learned a lot, and Josh, I'm going to be reaching out to you because I need to pick your brain. My words, it's not my parting words, but is that security, DevSecOps, zero trust, all of that stuff, it's all about risk and managing risk and mitigating risk. And it starts with the implementer or whoever is got hands-on. It starts at that level. You have to educate from, I hate saying the bottom, but you have to educate from the individual who's actually might be introducing the risk into the product all the way up. I think that that's very key and it's very important. And I'm speaking just from a personal level, because again, I have the heart and soul of a developer who cared not about security, but as I've grown up with the security and about it, I recognize, wow, I probably wrote some really bad code that has some holes, and hopefully it's no longer in the process. So you have to start with somebody like me and make me understand why this is important and help me educate myself so that I cannot just do a unit test to find out if I'm dividing by 0, but if there is other things that I don't know about that have to do with the whole system. Parting words.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Raven. And we will jump to Crystal next.
Yeah, I also have learned a ton, so I appreciate everybody's expertise here. This has been fantastic. I would just say that I feel like we're in a moment where we are really shifting our mindset from I need to protect myself, right, and create barriers around me to protect myself, to let me think of this from the bad actor's perspective. Right? How will they get in? Which is why, as Josh says, you've got multiple vendors involved, right? Because you've got different potentials and possibilities when you're thinking that way that you're trying to secure, and you might need different products, different levels of expertise in each of those areas. So, but I like this. I like to think about it as sort of this shift in mindset. Particularly around the security pieces, and then really a shift in culture around collaboration from the DevSecOps pieces.
Great, thank you, Crystal. And then we will hear from Derek next.
parting words, I used to spend a lot of time working with third graders. And so I always remind folks, hey, third grade. And if a third grader can understand it, you probably explained it right. And what I found is what I really took away from them is the why of things. Once they understand why, they're good. And you can literally see the light bulb come on with them. I mean, literally, when they get it, they got it. And I've employed the why of it throughout my career in making sure folks understand why they're doing what they're doing. And once they understand why, their posture changes, the collaborative nature changes. It's just all changes. And so I would just challenge everyone to think about the why of things and making sure you articulate the why of things as you move forward.
I love that. Super important. And Josh, we will have you wrap us up.
So one of my favorite analogies that I use when we're talking about zero trust, when we're talking about DevSecOps processes, is that, you know, we don't go build a zoo and we build the outside walls and put all the animals in and then try to come back and put the cages in and hope that all the animals end up where they're supposed to be without, you know, a random giraffe getting eaten somewhere. We construct the zoo with thought, with purpose. We construct it with habitats that exist for a reason, and we have to do that with our DevSecOps play. We have to design it with security in mind. It is not an afterthought. It's not something that we can come back later and do, or we're going to lose a couple of gazelles along the way. So that's just my parting words of wisdom back to the third graders. So
Shout out to the zoo. Yay, National Zoo.
This has been awesome, and we're ending right at 2:30. Yeah, good timing, everybody. I want to thank our partners again over at Beyond Trust and our panelists, of course, and also you all at home who've been participating in this conversation. We hope to see you all again next week at our next event. I think it will be up here on the screen momentarily. And that said, if you'd like to receive your CPE credit for today's event, go ahead and answer the fourth and final poll question we have. All right, so our next event is actually a hybrid event, so in person, or you can stay at home and log in, but we've got the ATARC Federal Security Breakfast Summit for DC scheduled April 14th at 7 a.m. And I hope to see, well, I'm not going to be there, but I will be logged in virtually, and maybe we'll all be able to gather together again soon at one of these upcoming events. So looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Thanks, Annette. I appreciate all your comments.